Listening Library presents Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Rey's Story, by Elizabeth Schaefer, read for you by January LaVoy.
Prologue. The asteroid was quiet. The great rocky mountains on its surface cast long shadows over high ridges and deep caves. Any sensors would bounce off the heavy metal ores that ran all the way through the floating rock. It was the perfect place to hide. Rey nudged her A-wing fighter forward. The ship lurched as the asteroid's gravity pulled it down, but Rey quickly adjusted her course. This wasn't her first time flying through an asteroid field. If she timed it just right, she could disappear into one of the caves below and... Blaster fire scorched the wing of Rey's ship. It was too late. The TIE fighter had found her. Rey immediately fired her thrusters to their max and dove into the nearest cave. The enemy ship tried to follow, but it couldn't make the turn in time. The TIE zoomed past the cave entrance before whipping back to track her down. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Rey mentally kicked herself for letting the enemy sneak up on her like that. Taking a deep breath, Rey refocused and flew farther into the branching cave. She was certain that one of the tunnels must lead back to the surface. She could hear the screech of the engines as the TIE closed in on her. If she didn't come up with a plan soon, she was going to run out of cave. Her sensors bounced uselessly off the rocks around her. But even without their guidance, Rey could see the walls were getting closer and closer. The only way out now was behind her. Behind me, Rey smiled. She had a crazy idea. If her sensors were malfunctioning, there was a good chance the TIE fighters were too. Slowly, Rey eased off her thrusters and took her ship as close to the cave floor as she could. She almost heard the pebbles vibrating beneath her as she skimmed along. 1 centimeter too low, and her A-wing would be a pile of rubble. Rey heard the TIE's engines grow louder and louder. Not yet. The cave began to rumble as the enemy ship drew closer. Almost there. The second she saw the TIE zoom out behind her, Rey slammed on her reverse thrusters. The TIE fired its blasters, but its targeting was completely off. The enemy ship clipped the top of her cockpit and blew past her. There was no way the TIE could slow down now. It sped out of control, deeper into the narrowing cave. A few seconds later, Rey saw the glow of an explosion as the TIE ran into the cave wall. Yes! Rey whipped off her helmet and punched the air. But her excitement faded as soon as she looked around her. It had just been a flight simulator, after all, but every time she took off the helmet, a part of her hoped she would have miraculously teleported to where she really belonged. Back with her family, wherever that may be. She was still sitting inside the Imperial Walker shell she called home. The sun still loomed large as it sank beneath the horizon. The blistering desert wind still scratched at her door. It was an evening just like the countless others Rey had spent alone on the sandy planet of Jakku. But Rey wasn't one to wallow. She shook off her disappointment and began preparing her pack for the next morning. There was a crashed Star Destroyer near the center of the starship graveyard she wanted to check out. Who knew what valuable salvage might be waiting inside? Rey filled one last canteen and stuffed it into her pack next to her staff. If there were any dangers waiting for her, Rey would be ready. She had survived many battles, not just in the simulator. But that was a worry for the next day. The morning would come soon enough. Chapter 1. Don't look down. Rey repeated that over and over to herself as she climbed down the side of the giant starship. There were more than 50 meters of rusty metal between her and the sandy desert floor below. Carefully, Rey reached down to a shallow overhang, looking around for a safe place to move her feet. The harsh wind of Jakku pulled at her clothes, but Ray held on tightly, slowly moving closer and closer to the solid ground. With every move, Ray's prizes clanked inside her satchel. The spare parts she had found aboard the crashed ship would earn her at least one portion of food from Unkar Plut, the salvage trader. Ray could stretch that to a few days' worth of meals. That was how Ray spent every day on Jakku. She would wake up early each morning and grab her satchel filled with water and supplies for the day. Then she would mount her speeder and head out into the vast starship graveyard. Valuable spare parts were scattered across the desert plains, if one knew where to look. By the end of the day, she had usually found enough salvage to trade for a portion or two of food. If she was really lucky, she'd find some spare parts that she could use to repair her speeder or patch up the traps protecting her home. On the best days, she would find old data chips that told stories about the galaxy outside Jakku. The dimly glowing words would conjure images of places Ray could only dream of. She would close her eyes and try to picture what the beautiful green forests or endless blue oceans on those distant planets looked like. But when she opened her eyes, she was still on Jakku. All she saw was the same desert that had stretched before her every day, as far back as she remembered. Ray's heavy boots thumped onto the burning sand when she finally reached the base of the ship. It was not the time for dreaming. She needed to carry her salvage back to Nema Outpost so she could trade it for supper and return home before sunset. She adjusted her goggles and rewrapped one of the loose, dingy cloths she used to keep the fierce sun off her arms and legs. Then she set her bag full of salvage on top of her sandboard. Ray had discovered the smooth metal sled as part of a Mon Calamari escape pod a few seasons back. After liberating it from the pod, Ray could use the sled to quickly descend the largest sand dunes. It was practical, and a whole lot of fun. Ray leaped onto the sandboard and rode it down the dune and toward her speeder. A smile threatened to reach her lips as the warm wind rushed past her. The sandboard didn't have the same smooth handling as her speeder, but that lack of control was also part of the thrill. Soon the board skidded to a halt in front of Ray's speeder. She tied her salvage and the board to the speeder and zoomed toward the setting sun on the horizon. As Nema Outpost slid into view, Ray could already see that the scattered tents and small spaceport were bustling with creatures of every shape and size. There was a long line of scavengers at the cleaning table. It had been a good day for many of them. Two Melitos hummed cheerfully as they cleaned off a massive panel from an old Trandoshan slave ship. The Melitos' sightless faces were turned skyward as they ran their super-sensitive cilia across the panel. Even without eyes, the aliens could clean and repair technology as well as any sighted race. Almost all the panel's circuitry looked like it was in working order. Unkar would surely give them a week's worth of portions for such a find. Ray hopped off her speeder and took a place near the excited Melitos at the cleaning table. The buzz of the marketplace pushed in around her as scavengers chatted about their finds, swapped tips about newly discovered wrecks, or shared news of explorers lost in the sinking fields. Ray was eavesdropping on a particularly interesting conversation about a new Tito settlement when she saw him. A little boy, no more than 7 or 8 cycles old, was exiting a nearby ship. Holding the little boy's hand was an older woman who, from the way she looked at the boy with such love and attention, must have been the boy's mother. The boy pointed excitedly at the strange aliens who passed by them. He must have had a million questions about the new planet. His mother reached down and playfully ran her hand through the boy's hair. Absent-mindedly, Ray mimicked the mother's loving gesture, softly stroking the salvage in her hand. Ray had no memory of her parents. She didn't know why they had taken her to Jakku or why they had left her there. For all she knew, they were long dead. Yet Ray couldn't help hoping that one day a transport would arrive and her parents would walk down the ship's ramp and back into her life. Ray looked down at the power cell she was washing. It had been clean for a good 5 minutes. Ray shook off her thoughts and carried her sparkling salvage over to Unkar's window. The old Krolut's saggy
Sample complete. Ready to continue?